Thanks for tuning in to The Leadership Beat, a Bates Communications original podcast series exploring leadership trends and inspiring leaders to innovate and think differently.
Cyber breaches, disruption to global markets, protecting the monetary system. These are the topics that keep my guest Lynn Dugle up at night. Lynn serves on the board of State Street Bank, leading their Technology and Operations Committee, and she grapples with this ever-changing reality every day. However, before that, she was the chairman, CEO, and president of Engility, where she turned around the $2 billion federal services company, leading it to 115% growth in stock price in just 2.5 years, and steering it through a successful acquisition by SAIC. This came after a 30-year career, rising through leadership roles in the defense, telecommunications, and space and national intelligence industry. Most recently as the only female business president at Raytheon, leading a $6 billion global business unit. And I'm delighted to be talking today about her unique lens on leadership. Lynn, welcome to the Leadership Beat.
Great to be here, Sarah.
Well, I wanted to start off talking about Engility and the incredible success you had after taking over the CEO seat. When you entered the role, what were some of the challenges that you identified that Engility was struggling with, and how'd you align the leadership team to deliver growth?
Well, Sarah, our mandate at Engility was crystal clear, and that is that we were a shrinking company. And for the last 5 years, we had double-digit shrinking. So it was a clarion call and a galvanizing rallying point for the team. And as I entered, I had the advantage of having been on the board for a year, observed, got to know some of the people, and then we came together, we brought in new talent, and we had to really teach ourselves and teach our team members how do we win in the federal service business.
And how did you do that? How did you get them on the same page about how to win?
People love to win, and we all hate to lose. And it really was more about framing the type of work we were going to go after, how we were going to go after it, and what we brought to our clients. And then I was very fortunate to have worked in my career with lots of incredibly talented people. And when I invited them to go on this grand adventure with me, they were kind enough to do it. So lots of new energy, lots of experience from the team members that had been there, and we just needed to get that combination right, and then attack it with energy.
Were there sort of strategic pivots that you had to make in able to turn that company around?
We did. When the company was chartered, it actually was spun out of L3. It was chartered to be the low-cost provider. And if you think about what was happening in the government in that moment, the budgets were coming down drastically, and so many companies were shrinking because the aggregate budget was shrinking. In our case, our competition started growing, and we were still in a shrinkage mode. And that was because we were trying to compete only on cost. And so the fun part was, let's all put on our thinking caps. What is it that our clients really need? We had a lot of empathy for our customers. Their budgets were smaller, and the national threat was not being reduced. So we had to get more for less. And it sounds like a cliche, but there are very clever ways to provide services using data, using automation, using past history to reduce that service load, the cost of that, and still get our customers what they really need to defend us, our friends, and our family.
Which is really a strategic shift for the leadership team to go on that journey with you. And throughout your career, you seem to have taken the road less traveled, pushing boundaries and challenging conventional wisdom. So what are some lessons learned for you over the years that have shaped the way that you lead, the fact that you will go that road less traveled?
I am a huge believer. I have, a grandma that had a huge influence on my life. She was this little 4'10" redhead who was literally an orphan. She got left on a step. And she was the smartest person, so wise, even though she only had a second grade education. And she taught me from a young age, right, to enjoy life, have a clean line of sight, and know that you're making a difference. Have fun more days than not, and don't work with jerks. And to me, that takes you in some wonderful, wonderful places. Because if you're not chasing a career or a title, and you're really just trying to find meaning in what you're doing, I think it just unlocks something inside yourself, and it attracts those kind of people. They just want to make a difference for our country, for our customers, just being a part of the national defense fabric. It's really meaningful, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, and so I love the story of your grandmother, and it sounds like her words of wisdom stayed with you in the way that you shaped your own leadership style and the way you lead teams based on that style. Mm-hmm. So I've also heard you say that testing assumptions is what it takes to be first. When talking about how you define success, can you tell us what you mean by that?
To me, there's always a better answer or a new answer or a different answer. And so that is all about never being static, not staying in the same place, and always pushing, if you will. Why do we do it that way? Why does the customer want that? Why do they need that? How could we do it differently? And it sounds easy, but as all of us become adults, there's a lot of science that says our brains fall into a pattern. So when we try to innovate, our brain follows a certain pattern. If we're in conflict resolution, if we're brainstorming. And so it really does take work. You've got to surround yourself with a great group of thinkers. And then you have to create that environment within a company and a team, right, where you can professionally challenge each other and every assumption. And it's amazing what you can come up with. That is different, a little bit new.
Well, this is the gold that many leaders are striving for, is that creating that culture and environment where they can pull knowledge and innovation up out of the organization and break old molds, or as you said, old patterns and ways of thinking. Is there a story you can share, or something that you can tell us, tactically speaking, about what you might have implemented or created that enabled that to happen in the organization?
I don't know if there's a secret sauce. Some days it works better than others, but I've been a huge believer of everybody bringing their complete knowledge, their complete experience. And many times we categorize each other into positions or a job, and we don't listen to people outside of that narrow area. So one of the things, and people used to think I was crazy, is I would have my collective leadership team. And I always like to have a large leadership team instead of surrounding myself with just 3 or 4 or 5 people. But bringing everyone. When you're talking about your next, say, analytics tool that you want to develop and bring to the market, I had my communications person there. I had my strategy person there, not just my product people. And so you have to invest the time because sometimes you have a very large meeting and people say, gosh, too many people in the room. But I think you have to make those kind of investments, and then you have to respect everyone. If you're in a room and people aren't listening when you're talking, or they're not really processing and taking on what you're saying, then it's, you're not going to get that. And it's a bit of what years later became, inclusion and diversity. But, that's easy to say and it's hard to do.
Right. For example, someone in your communications team can get invited to the meeting, right? But having them feel as though they belong at the meeting
Right.
is a very different dynamic, isn't it?
It is. And I'll never forget, I had my first diversity training in the mid-'80s. And if you would have looked into that classroom, you would have thought we were the poster child for diversity. You know, every color, gender, sexuality, ethnic group, and the professor, he was a PhD, he gave us a Myers-Briggs test, and he asked us, he said, how do you think the company does in diversity? And we said, gosh, we're great, and we kind of gave ourselves an A, and he said, well, I look at these results and I say, you get an F, because 23 out of 24 of us were the same personality.
Yeah.
Right? And so it didn't matter. I mean, we had no diversity of thought. We attacked problems the same way. We all acted like each other. We spoke on top of each other. And he said, you've missed the point, because visual diversity doesn't give you the creativity. It doesn't give you the innovation. It's that different experience, right? Have you lived in different countries? Have you worked in different professions? You know, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Those are the things that are real difference, meaningful difference. And that's where you get people going. You know, you have that orthogonal thought. I've never considered that. You know, when you're in a meeting and you have that aha moment with the team, it doesn't get any better than that.
Indeed. And now, as a board director for a global bank, how does that dynamic translate into how boards must lead for the future?
You know, I think boards really have got to change, and I have a lot of passion around that next generation director and what should they look like. And traditionally, we recruited for directors by saying you were a CEO or you were at this position, you led this large of a team, which are all good experiences to bring in the boardroom. But now I think we really have to look much deeper. And we have to say, how do individuals and directors, how do they contribute to risk reduction of the company? Can they think and move quickly? Can they ingest technology? Not to be the expert on everything, right? But to be able to understand the implication for their businesses. And so I think all of those changes, all of those experiences, and then really a commitment to stay sharp and to continue to learn and to study the market and study your company.
And you've told me how challenging that can be when the information is changing constantly. And I think at one point you said to me the board books are 1,500 pages long, right? So, you know, getting the time and the ability to really understand what you need to understand in order to contribute significantly is one of the challenges I know you and I have talked about. So what matters most in your opinion when you think about that board director of the future? Is it proven experience or is it proven capability to contribute at a particular level?
Right. I think it's both. But I think historically we've been weighted much heavier on the experience side. Being able to look at a resume and check a box. Do you know your financials? Do you? And we went click, click, click. Now I think we have to think much broader. I think some of the most powerful people in boardrooms today are CIOs, past or present, technologists, people that have routinely worked, analyzed data, because really your role is as a director, right, is to help the executive management team see things perhaps a little bit differently. And you're there to help and to contribute. And yes, you have a fiduciary and an oversight responsibility as a certainly as any director, but as a public company director. But you want to be able to ask good questions and give your experience. And so certainly for me, I've spent my life in and around technology, in cyber. And so you just have to keep studying. Nothing ever stands still. And I think that's quite different than boards in the past. Many of us came into the boardroom with whatever experience we had, and then we applied it as we can. Now I think there's just this mandate of continuous education as a director that all of us, if we want a job, want that job, and want to do it well, then we need to, as you said, make the time, invest it. And continue our education.
Which really presents a very different challenge for the NomGov committee, doesn't it? In the way they look for directors, look at potential directors, and so what practice must they stop, and what must they start?
You know, when I sold Engility, I got approached by a number of different companies on board positions, and it really was surprising to me, Sarah, how much alike all of them were. And so I think the first thing we have to stop doing is using the position description that we used 10 years ago to recruit for today's director. And I think you really do have to get more into that capability category that you were talking about, right? One of the things that boards need to do, and there's kind of categories, certainly succession planning and approval of the strategy. But for me, in today's world, it really is about dynamic risk management, risk mitigation, and opportunity exploitation. And so as a director, how do you bring those skills and way of thinking into the boardroom? And so you need to be looking for different people. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to have been a CEO. You might have been a human resource leader, right? Especially if you're in a people business. So I think we need to start with a different position description that has more of a balance between the experience that you've had professionally and then your personal characteristics, the way you think, those kind of things as that capability, which is hard. It's hard to interview someone and really get a good feel for that.
And the dynamic that you described with a successful, innovative leadership team in an operating company sounds like that also translates into the way a board is enabling voices in the room. And I'm curious if you're also thinking that there's not just a future director profile, but there may also be a future profile of the way boards are interacting and dialoguing.
It's an excellent point. I'm very fortunate in the boards that I'm on that those companies have an open door policy. And so we spend a lot of time as directors, not just with the executive committee, but individuals and leaders and high potential employees, every board meeting. We travel to other countries so we can really get a sense of the operations. And I think the point you're making is an important one, to really do deep succession planning, to really understand the risk profile of the company. You have to know the people that are leading and operating that company. And I think boards are really changing from that. We show up 4 times a year. We, have read the presentations. They are then presented back to us. There's some comments made and we leave. That is the old board model. What you're describing is much more interactive, much more dynamic, and that's what good companies do.
Aside from your role at State Street, what else are you working on that's personally important to you?
Well, one of the things is one of the areas, Sarah, you and I have spent some time talking about, and that is how do we get the non-traditional candidate into the boardroom? How do we get more women, more people of color, younger people, people with stronger technology skills. And so I'm now on a board called B2B Project, which is very focused on doing just that. And my husband and I are very focused. We've got a heart for Africa and looking at what are sustaining models for not just donating time and money, but actually helping lift the continent up and really empowering especially young children. Where we focus our efforts are with young girls and boys that have been orphaned either through tribal warfare, disease, but really have been left to fend for themselves. And so lots of great things to spend some time doing outside of the work environment.
Wonderful. And I always like to ask the question about going back to your 25-year-old self. And you not only have you had a career where you've broken through the glass ceiling several times, but you've done it in an industry, in a career choice that was very pioneering for women in the STEM field. So looking back on that career, and not that it's over, you've got plenty more to do, Lynn. What advice would you give your 25-year-old self now?
I can hardly remember who that person was. But I think, like a lot of us, my advice would be never tell yourself no. There were so many times where I didn't feel like I was up to the challenge or I wasn't quite ready for the position. And I was really fortunate that I had some wonderful people that didn't listen to me at all and said, you're going to go into those jobs and you're going to do them just fine. And when I stumbled, they forgave me as they lent a hand and taught me what I needed to know. But I know that happens to women all the time. We don't quite feel we're there, and we are there. And if we're not there, we'll get there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lynn, for all of the wonderful stories and insights you shared with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you so much.